This wasn't a romance. It was a choice. It was a rainy afternoon when she first met him. The kind of day where the world felt muted, with soft raindrops tapping against windows and a gray mist hanging in the air. She was in the city for a work trip, a place she didn't visit often, surrounded by people who were focused on their own lives. Emily had always been the kind of person who kept to herself. She had her routines, her goals, and her life neatly planned out. Her friends often joked that she was too structured, but Emily never saw it as a flaw. It was just who she was. That day, however, something felt different. She was at the coffee shop, just another stop before her meeting. She ordered her usual drink, a simple cappuccino, and found a small corner table to sit and prepare for the long day ahead. As she pulled out her notes and laptop, she noticed him. He was sitting across the room, alone, with a book in hand. He didn't seem like the type to draw attention to himself, but somehow he did. He was calm, almost meditative, in the way he read. His face a picture of concentration. It wasn't that he was strikingly handsome or stood out in any extraordinary way, but there was something about him that made her pause. It was a quiet energy, a sense of stillness in the chaos of the bustling city around them. For a moment, Emily wondered why she was even thinking about him. It wasn't like her to notice people this much, let alone someone who didn't seem to be paying attention to the world. But then their eyes met. It wasn't a dramatic glance, but it was enough. A flicker of connection, brief yet undeniable. And just like that, she looked away, almost embarrassed by the unexpected moment. She tried to focus back on her notes, but it was hard. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing to hold on to, but it was there, a quiet thread of curiosity. As the minutes passed, she tried to ignore the nagging thought at the back of her mind, but it was difficult. The longer she sat there, the more her mind wandered. She thought about how strange it was that she, of all people, was so aware of someone else in such a random setting. Emily wasn't the type to let her mind wander like this. She had always been focused, always on top of things, but for some reason, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man across the room. He had finished his book by now, and as he stood up to leave, he looked in her direction again. This time, instead of quickly looking away, Emily found herself holding his gaze for just a second longer. There was something calming about him, something almost reassuring, as if, in that brief exchange, the world outside had quieted just enough to make it feel like the two of them were the only ones who truly existed in that space. It was a fleeting moment. He walked out of the coffee shop without another word, disappearing into the crowd outside, and Emily went back to her work, trying her best to shake the odd sense of connection she had just felt. But it lingered, quietly in the back of her mind, as she spent the rest of the day in meetings and conference calls. There was no romance in it. No grand love story, but something about that brief encounter made her feel as though her world had shifted, just a little. Days passed, and life went back to its regular pace. Emily returned to her routine, her job, her responsibilities. But the feeling she had experienced that day didn't go away. It wasn't love, not in any conventional sense. It wasn't even attraction. It was something quieter, something she couldn't fully understand. And yet, she found herself thinking about it, replaying that moment in her mind, wondering if he had felt it too, or maybe he hadn't even noticed her at all. Maybe it was just her overactive imagination, making something out of nothing. But the more Emily thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't about him at all. It wasn't about his quiet presence, or the strange connection they had shared. It was about something within her. Something she had been ignoring for a long time. She had spent so much of her life focused on her career, her goals, and her plans, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be present in the moment, to let things unfold without always trying to control them. For the first time in a long time, she realized that she didn't have all the answers. That maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than what she had been focused on. It was a thought that scared her. She had built her life around certainty, around the belief that if she just worked hard enough, everything would fall into place. But now, She wondered if there was more, if there were possibilities she had been shutting out, simply because they didn't fit with her well-organized plan. The next time she saw him was a week later, during another coffee run. She had almost forgotten about the strange encounter, convinced it had been nothing more than a fleeting moment. But there he was again, sitting in the same spot, reading his book. This time, she didn't hesitate. She ordered her drink, took a deep breath, and walked over to him. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, with that same quiet calm. For a moment, she thought he might say no, that he might prefer to be alone. But instead, he simply nodded, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. "Of course," he replied, a small, genuine smile playing at the corners of his lips. And just like that, they began talking. It started with small talk, as most conversations do. But soon they were discussing things that felt much deeper than the weather or the latest news. They spoke about life, about their dreams, and about the choices they had made. Emily was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. It wasn't just about the words they shared, but the way they listened, as though they were both hearing things that went beyond the surface. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people sharing a moment of quiet understanding. In that moment, Emily realized something important. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't even about the man sitting across from her. It was about the choice to let go of her rigid expectations and allow life to unfold in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was about the choice to open up, to be vulnerable, and to trust that sometimes the most important moments in life aren't the ones we planned for, but the ones that surprise us when we least expect it. As the conversation drew to a close, Emily felt something inside of her shift. She wasn't sure what the future held, or whether she would see him again. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to have all the answers. She didn't feel the need to control every aspect of her life. She had made a choice that day, one that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with herself. A choice to embrace the unknown, to step away from the comfort of her carefully crafted life, and to let herself experience something different. It had been a few weeks since their last conversation, and Emily found herself thinking about it more often than she cared to admit. The day she met him in the coffee shop had sparked something inside her, a feeling that she couldn't quite explain. The connection between them wasn't anything extraordinary, at least not in the way people often described romantic connections, but it was real. And it had left her wondering about her own life choices, about the direction she was heading, and about the things she had been avoiding. Work had always been her focus. She had spent years building a career she could be proud of. She had goals, ambitions, and a clear plan for what her future should look like. But as the days went by, she started to notice that the path she had carefully constructed for herself felt less fulfilling. It was like she was stuck in a cycle, going through the motions without ever really experiencing the world around her. She realized that, for all her success, she had been missing out on something deeper, something more meaningful. Her conversation with him had made her realize just how much she had been holding back. When they spoke, it wasn't about achievements or the next big project. It wasn't about impressing each other with accomplishments or discussing plans for the future. They simply talked about life, about their experiences, their hopes, and the moments that had shaped them. There was no pressure, no need to perform. It was just two people sharing a space, being present in the moment. That was something Emily had never really experienced before. She had always been so focused on the future, on what came next, that she had forgotten to appreciate what was happening in the present. The world around her had become a blur of deadlines, meetings, and endless tasks. But that day, when they sat in the coffee shop, everything had slowed down. It was a moment of clarity, a moment where she could breathe and simply exist. As time passed, Emily started to notice more of these moments. Small, quiet instances where she could pause and just be. She began to appreciate the little things more. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows, the warmth of a cup of coffee, the feeling of the sun on her face. These were the moments that had always been there, but she had been too busy to notice. And it was in these moments that she found herself wondering whether she had been living her life the way she truly wanted to, or whether she had been chasing after things that didn't really matter. It wasn't easy for her to admit. She had spent so many years building a life based on what she thought she should want, but now she was beginning to question it all. Was this the life she had dreamed of? Was it enough? Or had she been living for the wrong reasons? The more she reflected, the more she realized that she wasn't just questioning her career or her lifestyle, she was questioning herself. Who was she, without the titles and accomplishments? What did she truly want from life? These were questions she had never really asked herself before, and they felt both frightening and liberating. In the weeks following their conversation, she made small changes in her life. She started saying yes to things she normally would have turned down. Weekend trips, spontaneous outings, moments of connection that didn't have anything to do with work. She gave herself permission to live outside the rigid structure she had created. She began to see life in a different way, one that wasn't defined by deadlines or expectations, but by experiences and the connections she made along the way. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about the man she had met in the coffee shop or any romantic notion. It was about her, and about her own journey. She realized that sometimes the most significant changes in life come not from grand decisions or major life events, but from simple moments of reflection, from the quiet realization that you can choose a different path, one that feels more true to who you are. One day, a few weeks after their first conversation, she bumped into him again. This time, it wasn't in a coffee shop, but on the street. She was walking home from work, her mind preoccupied with the thoughts she had been carrying with her for days, when she saw him standing on the sidewalk. He was holding a small book in his hand, just as he had the first time, and he was looking up, as if he was waiting for something. When he saw her, a smile spread across his face. It wasn't the kind of smile that suggested anything more than a simple acknowledgement, but it was warm, genuine, and comforting. They exchanged pleasantries, talking about the weather and how busy life had been. It was a brief conversation, but one that felt comfortable and easy. As they parted ways, Emily realized something important. She wasn't waiting for a dramatic moment, a grand gesture, or a life-altering decision. She was simply living her life, and for the first time, it felt right. She wasn't bound by any expectations, and she wasn't trying to force anything. She was just being, and that was enough. Over time, Emily continued to make changes in her life, not because she was trying to run away from something, but because she was starting to embrace who she was, flaws and all. She realized that life wasn't about following a predetermined script. It wasn't about finding the perfect moment or making the perfect decision. It was about being open to whatever came her way, accepting the good and the bad, and finding meaning in the moments that truly mattered. As she moved forward, she didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know where her path would take her, or whether she would see him again. But for the first time in a long time, she was okay with that. She had made peace with the uncertainty of life, and that was enough for her. She was no longer living for anyone else's expectations, but for her own. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift she could give herself. Over the next few months, Emily felt like she was waking up to a new version of herself. It wasn't that everything in her life had drastically changed overnight. It wasn't that she had suddenly figured out all the answers, but something had shifted inside her. A quiet realization that perhaps she had been living with her eyes closed for too long. Her life, once a series of tasks and goals, had started to feel more like a journey, one that she wasn't rushing through anymore. She had never been one to entertain the idea of fate or destiny. But after everything that had happened, after the chance meeting with him and the series of reflections it sparked, she couldn't help but feel like something was guiding her in a direction she had never considered before. It wasn't a path she could see clearly ahead of her, but she was beginning to trust that the path would reveal itself as she moved forward. Her job, which had once been her entire world, no longer consumed her every waking moment. Emily had always been the type of person who worked tirelessly, focusing all her energy on achieving success. It was how she had built her career, and it was the story she had told herself about who she was. But now, work no longer felt like the thing that defined her. It was a part of her life, yes, but it wasn't her whole life. The balance she had been searching for had come quietly, without her realizing it. It came not through force or effort, but through simply allowing herself to experience life beyond the confines of her office or her to-do lists. She started taking more time for herself, for things she had once dismissed as distractions. She went for walks, listened to music, read books that weren't related to work, and spent time with people who made her laugh. She learned to enjoy the simple act of doing nothing, something she had always seen as a waste of time before. But now, those moments of stillness were precious. It was in those moments that she discovered what it truly meant to feel alive, to be in the moment, without thinking about what came next. But even as she began to embrace this new way of living, she couldn't shake the thought of him. Not in a romantic sense, not in the way one might think of a crush or infatuation. No, it was something deeper, something that had to do with the shift in her own life. When they had talked, it wasn't just about words exchanged. It was the way he had listened, the way he had made her feel, like she didn't need to be anything other than who she was. In a world where so much of what mattered was about performing, about impressing, about constantly striving for more, their conversation had been a breath of fresh air. It was a reminder that sometimes it was okay to simply be. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that their brief encounter had taught her something important. That life wasn't just about chasing the next big thing or following a set of prescribed steps. It was about choosing to be present, about allowing herself to explore what life had to offer, even if it was uncertain. She had spent so much of her life in control, constantly planning, but now she realized that some of the best moments came when she let go of that control and allowed herself to experience the world as it came. One afternoon, she was sitting at a park, a place she had started visiting more often, when she caught sight of him again. He was walking past, his head buried in a book, just as he had been the first time they met. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why it had that effect on her. It wasn't that she had been thinking about him constantly, but the sight of him still felt like a small, unexpected surprise. This time, she didn't wait for him to notice her. She stood up and walked over. "Hey," she said, her voice casual but warm. He looked up, his face lighting up in a small, genuine smile. "Oh, hey," he said, putting the book down. "How are you?" "I'm good," Emily replied, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. There was no tension, no awkwardness. It was just two people meeting again after some time had passed. "How about you?" "Same old," he shrugged.
"Busy, but can't complain. How's work treating you?"
Emily thought about it for a moment.
"It's fine. Busy, like you said. But I'm learning to take things a bit slower, you know? Enjoy the small moments more."
He nodded. "I get that."
Life has a way of moving fast. Sometimes it's good to hit the pause button. They stood there, chatting about the usual things: work, life, small updates. There was nothing profound about their conversation, but it felt comfortable, easy. And in that moment, Emily realized something. She didn't need anything more. She didn't need a grand gesture or some big moment of clarity. She had already made the most important choice of all: to stop searching for answers and simply live. And in this small exchange, this simple conversation, she could see that her life was heading in the right direction. As they said their goodbyes and parted ways once more, Emily didn't feel disappointed or sad. She didn't feel like something was missing. Instead, she felt grateful. Grateful for the unexpected moments that had brought her here, for the lessons she had learned along the way, and for the sense of peace she had found within herself. The journey wasn't over, and she knew that. Life would continue to unfold, and she would continue to make choices, big and small, that would shape her future. But now she understood that the journey itself was just as important as the destination. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She didn't need to have all the answers. She just needed to be present, to live fully in each moment, and to trust that everything would fall into place as it was meant to. And in that realization, Emily found something she had been searching for all along. A deep sense of contentment, not in what she had or what she was doing, but in who she was becoming. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was hers, and that was enough. She had learned to embrace the unknown, to take risks, and to trust in the flow of life. And in doing so, she had found the peace she had been craving all along. It wasn't a destination. It was a choice, and it was the most important choice she had ever made.